and good evening. It's February 8th, 2024 already. Welcome back to another episode of our Sons of the Father. We're still continuing our discussions on The Chosen, created by Dallas Jenkins. And tonight we will continue exploring Season 3, Episode 7, Ears to Hear. And this is our Part 2. During this series, my dad, John Wern, my brother, Jim Wern, and of course myself, we're going to be having a discussion, a conversation, and reflecting on the things that have impacted us along our way with this. So, welcome to the Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, that's when you click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think that these might be useful to others, that's when you click the like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. Okay, ears to hear. Okay, we need to remember that the followers of Messiah, right, they're cooking up something because they're doing something within the understanding that they think that they have, right? With their eyes to see, there still can be challenges at times, anytime, especially even with us today, because we, like them, are for all to see. And that includes if we misunderstand or misinterpret it. Interesting. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks.
So, part 2. We talked about, Leander getting in and doing this thing, getting them on this trip where they need to make the wander. And so they break off, but yet we have a couple stories that still happen before they're gone. But there's stories that are happening behind them that are important, right? Yeah. And one of them being Simon with Gaius. Okay. And even how Simon ends up there is a creative thing. So let's just start with Simon and Gaius, and we'll walk through that little discussion because that has a bunch of mix up in it all over the place. So, Daddy-o, how did that grab you?
Well, that was interesting conversation, but they're saying a lot through this whole episode. A lot of different stories are being formed, and the one that Peter and Gaius are having is one that develops into something. They don't know it at the time, but I think it's interesting how they get connected in this. That what Dallas has woven into the story, and they're in his house. He's drug him over there. Because if he leaves him wandering around out there, he's going to end up in prison. Mm-hmm. And again, we don't know that this is how God put all this together, but you can see the story coming together. And I've seen this episode 4 times, and I pick up something different every time. And I noticed in their conversation how Gaius's wife is sizing up the whole as this unfolds. Well, is he is this the healer? Is this the teacher? And Gaius is pushing it down. And then, of course, he confesses to Peter that it was an affair that he had with his servant girl that ended up with the son. So he knows, but it's just part of what's being said in this episode. And anybody who's listening or watching, You really need to watch this several times to get all that's going to be unfolding as the episodes go forward, I think. And it's fascinating to listen to the confusion and the discussions that they're having individually with Mary and Rama. They're talking about Thomas and it just goes on and on and on. So I go ahead to save me on this. I'm just rattling on.
It was interesting. I was rewatching it today, and I thought, and it's funny. I was actually driving in the car, listening to it, and so rather than watching and trying to figure out what's going on visually, I'm just hearing the words.
That's a
And it's
different dynamic, isn't it, Jimmy?
it absolutely is, and it's funny.
Yeah.
When I was taking a class on coaching, one of the things that they recommended that you do is you watch yourself. Like record yourself, then play it back and watch it, then play it back and watch it without the audio. So all you see is the visual and see what your expressions are. Then turn off the video and just listen to the audio.
Right.
And then go back and read the transcript, to be able to get the full picture. And this one, just listening to the audio, it's like, whoa, I picked up on things I didn't notice before. That was really interesting. So yes, that scene, very powerful. Obviously, Dad, you're right. They're building up to something with Peter down the road. As we talked earlier, Bob, you were talking about some stuff 40 years down the road that we're going to see. But the vulnerability, and you see Gaius starting to be impacted by what he's hearing, both about Jesus and Jesus himself, that is changing his perspective about his own life. And he talked about the fact that he had this relationship with the servant who now he has the child. At the time, it was normal. This was not anything. It wasn't an affair at the time. It was
Common
typical,
behavior.
common behavior in Roman culture. But he said, now I'm starting to rethink it, and he's realizing that probably wasn't the best decision. And I loved even his wife when she said, does he know the whole story? And it's like, no, not everything. Of course, then he goes and tells him more of the rest of the story after that. Yeah. But there's definitely something there in terms of you're seeing the dynamic between Gaius and his wife.
Yeah.
Also, obviously, an openness on her part. She wants this child helped. So she isn't having necessarily an animosity relationship with the child.
Right.
So that's a dynamic to pay attention to. And then, of course, just Peter's own place of being vulnerable. And even when Gaius started talking about, second thoughts about what his actions were, Peter said, I'm not here to judge. Peter's had enough issues in his own life already that he's like, I'm in no place, to say, what's right or wrong here. I've been there, done that kind of thing. Maybe not necessarily that particular action, but understands well enough. I've violated plenty of our own laws,
right?
That I'm not here to judge. So yeah, it was great to see that whole scene unfold, and you getting another layer of the onion in terms of what both Gaius is going through, but what Peter's going through as well.
Yeah, those are. It's interesting. Again, we were talking off camera earlier that we realize that this dynamic in this story isn't the scripture story. In other words, all we have in scripture is a Roman centurion that has a servant son that he wants to be healed. Okay,
right.
And obviously, we get from the story in scripture that there is a point that he believes in what's happening. It's not just a want; there's a belief, because Jesus addresses that point. He talks about it. I see something in him that I'm not getting from you guys,
Right.
So we're getting this story that Dallas has creatively woven through that is giving us maybe, this more person that we're looking at, and the messiness and challenges that go with that. I find it, again, creative, the the adding the elements of Roman culture and behavior to one realizing maybe that's not really the best thing to do in this point. And then still dealing with, you made a very good point that she wants the son to be, she doesn't know healing. She just knows doctors.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Fixing,
So she's not expecting a miraculous thing. She is expecting that some doctor can come and deal with him, which other ones haven't been able to, and or wouldn't, because like he talked about in a previous deal about his being that he's from a slave son, just looking at him is not going to fit the Roman fix. Yeah,
Right.
But even she has she wants that, but the reservation of the line I put it that no, Olivia, Jewishness is not contagious. I got a really light kick out of that. That in that perception, because she's hand him the cloak and that do I hand it? You're like, hand him the cloak, that. But you think when you really think about that, said what are the things that people think sometimes, and the brutal mirror picture is what do people think of us?
Yeah.
And that scares me more than about anything else. I get it that the story is always about them and their sandals, but if we put those same sandals on, what we have with that? And Simon realizing that he knows as he leaves that he's going to need to bring this up to Jesus eventually, but as soon as he leaves and takes off, his mindset is off in another direction because of what's happening. Yeah, we just know that Gaius shows him some care, concern, mercy for being in the area and doing that, and sending him home safely. But that there's something that Simon, we know, will in the storyline we can see will develop in return, and that's an interesting point. Then we segue from that into another conversation that we have with some people that were, and that's that had happened. It was in the story setup of Matthew talking to Mary, and the seat side of the equation, and the story, the deep story behind that. So, Dad, how did you think of that? How they're going to have to address that? Because we do have a perceived violation of space. I mean, there's a lot that goes on in this that we need to kind of think about, because what would we take if we had those sandals on, and how would we take that response? So, well,
here's that they're saying a lot of things, and what the old, you can't separate Mary's discussion with Matthew without including the old man in it at his booth that just threw him a curveball, and he didn't know what to do with that. He had never experienced that. It was totally foreign to him. And every time the old man would say something that would make Matthew think about, he definitely went straight to money, because that was his whole. I was in a discussion today with a guy about Zacchaeus, and everything he thought about was money. It was his every day, all day. And here this guy was talking about something completely different. And then when he's talking with Mary about it, and then is it Andrew or no, it's not Andrew. Who's out there getting to put him on his robe? One of the apostles that's getting Matthew.
Nathaniel, I think.
Nathaniel. It's evolving, but all those pieces had to come together to make the story. And isn't that the same with our lives? All these pieces that come together to make our story.
Mm-hmm.
And as he was talking, um, what's valuable? The old man, it was the tzitzis that were
Mm-hmm.
valuable, and to Matthew, it was money that was valuable. And then when he's talking with Mary, he gets very upset about it because he still can't deal with it. And I just saw that as fascinating in our own lives today, that we get something from God for free. And no, because it's not in our economy. It's got to be a trick. You got to be somewhere along the line where he's going to say, as the mafia,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you do this for me later on, and I'll do this for you later on. You do something. I mean, that's the kind of
Yeah.
thinking that I had. And when I first heard about this Jesus guy, I said, nah, you don't get nothing for nothing.
Hmm.
And this is the first real picture of it in regards to discussion in it. So I thought that was not only his talk with Mary, but his talk with Nathaniel and his talk with the old man at his booth, all
Hmm.
tied together.
Yeah.
Yeah, me.
Yeah, that was the discussion that I got to listen to today driving that just sunk in deep. And I loved the flashback to this man who, honestly, if you look at Matthew's life, this was the equivalent of somebody planting a seed. As we
Oh,
talk about,
yeah, oh yeah, oh
evangelizing,
yeah.
there's those who plant, those who, harvest, or those who water, then those who harvest. This was a planting. Because Jesus comes around later on and does the same kind of thing, kind of throws him for a loop, but he's already been thrown for a loop by one guy, and it's kind of rocked his world. So there's fertile ground there for something to happen.
Mhm.
And the story of this man saying that he bought all of his kids and his family's debt so that they didn't have to deal with it,
Mhm.
to a guy who's an accountant who says everybody should be accountable to everything that's rocking Matthew's world. And he
The
even said at
paradigm
one point,
changes.
this is
Yeah.
this is not going to look good on me because I wasn't tracking this well enough to realize what you were doing. And the man's willingness to assume responsibility. He knew full well what he was doing. He did it within the legal bounds of the system, and he knew what the consequences were going to be. And he was willing to take it because he cared about his family. He cared about those because he knew that indebtedness was huge. It's always been huge. It's not like it feels huge now. I mean, when you look at our country's debt and people's personal debt, it's mind-boggling
Yeah.
and an incredible heavy weight on people because of the cost of life and everything. It's no different. It was the same back then. It
Mhm.
was a different money system and a different denomination of currency, but the same debt.
Mhm.
People were slaves because they were in debt.
Mhm.
And this man was trying to provide freedom. And I loved Mary's line with regard to what, when he gave him the tassel, it was, he was giving you his faith.
Yeah.
That's what was important to him. Not the money, not the value of the item, the significance. And I did love the explanation as he was putting it on his robe, and the other disciple was explaining, each of the things and what it was. I love the symbolism, and I didn't understand it, and I never knew it before. And Bob, I know you know a lot more about this
It's
than all
it's
of us.
it's in my background behind. It's right
Yeah,
where my
I
fingers
see
at
it.
is where one of my seats is hanging.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And each thing means something, and I
Mhm.
love the significance of that because that's, again, the remembrances that are so powerful
Mhm.
that we lack in our culture. And so that kind of stuff I thought was really cool in terms of how it all came out.
Yeah, there's a lot in the tzitzit story. You've hit it there. We're talking about a lineage and a history that Matthew had. I'll mix of both, of forsaken and forgot. A little bit of both, in there. When you forsake something, since it's not in your forefront, it's not going to be something that's going to be refreshed. Yeah.
Right.
Matthew would have realized that the feasts are happening every year, but since he's not part of it, the significance of that wouldn't be there. Yeah.
Right.
The same thing with the tzitzit. And this man is Matthew's world again, like Dad, like you were saying, the value thing has been a rock shock the other way. Right. The understanding that value isn't in it's not monetary in God's economy, right? In God's economy, that's not a value. That's why it says the gold and the silver, when you die, it stays here. What you do and how that expresses itself, i.e., the faith that we're talking about with this man, is the legacy that is passed on. So he's passing on a legacy, and it's fascinating because we see his passing on of legacy to his family by absorbing their debt. Right. We have Yeshua, we have Messiah, we have Jesus's imagery, just big red letters scribbled all over that, But we have the passing. He takes the time to pass on the legacy. Somebody, it's not his kid,
right?
It's not his son, and yet he's taken a point to say this is. It's almost as echoes of the 99 and 1. There's echoes of it in this. You if you close your eyes and you listen, you can hear that the one wayward is one that he's reaching out to, and it's so deep in that point. And then Matthew, it's still time before he even he doesn't grasp it until Mary, and I started this violates the space.
Right.
Mary violates the space. His first reaction, the reason we have this conversation is because she violated it before and he barked at her.
Right.
And then he comes back in apology and he's humbling himself. He said, I was wrong. And why? And he's starting to question himself in his thinking. He's getting broader in his scope, right? So then we get to see him then open up the vulnerability, which allows Mary to then share her insight, which she is very insightful, as we see with most. And she brings that little part and says, maybe it's time for you to put them on.
Yeah.
Another step to embrace, which I really liked in this a lot, more than other people might realize with this, that it wasn't like Jesus took him on and then said, okay, by the way, here's your uniform. Go put on your Jesus follower uniform. Here it is, little robe, a little Obi-Wan Kenobi's all following each other around the Yoda, kind of deal. That's not what we have. He says, and he gets there, and you'll get it, and you'll get there. And then Mary gets a chance to help, and then Nathaniel. Mary would understand the importance. It's Nathaniel that helps him with the practicality side. And, this is where they go and all that kind of thing, which I think what was fun. The little humanness that goes with this, and Matthew's lack of understanding and vulnerability is cute.
Yeah.
I get a kick out of that. Because it takes us place. So after that, now we're walking, and we've got now John and Simon are hoofing it to catch up. And the discussion that they have down there is I don't know if heated's the word, but it's definitely filled with energy.
Passion. Yep.
And passion. And each of them is viewing it from a different reason, and they're dealing from a different view of pain as to how they're viewing how the other one is responding. Fair? So, Dad, what do you think as they're making that walk? What are they? That whole. There's lots of things that go on.
There's a couple of things. First, Jesus has this conversation with John,
Mhm.
And that's critical to it.
Yeah.
And John is trying to talk him out of it because he wants to be, I don't want to stay behind. And that's the way I am. I want to go where the action is. And sometimes Jesus says you got to stop to go. And he knew that was the right guy to have wait for Peter. And when they talked, Peter's over here, and John is here because Peter's ticked off about what happened with his wife, and John doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. And so there's two different conversations going on. Well, maybe three.
And they don't realize they're having 2 or 3 conversations. I agree.
No,
Yeah.
they don't. So John is getting in his face, and Peter's still over here, and Peter just stops because he's run out of steam. He doesn't know what to do. He knows what he wants to do, but he knows that's not the right thing to do, which is what happens to me still, but certainly did uh, back when God asked me to do something. No, sell your business and come to work for this nickel and dime minister. What are you talking about? Okay, I know. I will put in my head an amount of money and that'll be the end of it.
No.
Uh-oh. But God was nice enough to let that go, and he's still working with Peter and John, of course, as they start to talk about it and bring it up to Peter. And as we talked about earlier, Peter, you're supposed to do, you Jesus says you're going to be part of this. And Peter says, I don't want to be part of it. I want him to fix my wife. Where was he when I needed him? He obviously didn't have to be there. And he points out a couple of other miracles that he did. And I keep bringing it to me and to the world today because Jesus hasn't changed. Everything around us has changed. Life has changed, but Jesus hasn't. And he still comes to us asking us to trust him. And that's what he was asking from John and from Peter. Trust me. I will take care of this. And that's, of course, what they're confused about and everything on the road. So, Jim, what'd you see?
I saw what they were talking about and what they were trying to deal with and wrestle with. And then I saw what was God doing in terms of or what was Jesus trying to do in them. It's that whole thing of, Dad, you're talking about, getting the job at Johnny and Friends, my job at Home Depot. It's like, oh, they need me, because I can do this, this, and this. And it's like, no, Jim, maybe you need this because God wants to do something in you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, and that's what it's been, a learning experience. And even John, who was confused, why are you making me stay with Peter? Well, we know down the road, again, we know that the not the end of the story because it's not over yet, but their stories in terms of who John was, if there was one major topic in all of John's writings, it's love. And John's learning what love is because Jesus is making him deal with Peter. Peter right now just needs somebody to come up alongside him. That's what he needs. So Jesus is trying to teach John this. Jesus is doing the same thing with Peter. What Peter's needing to do down the road, he's been prepping him for. giving him this space to go wander around the city and run into Gaius and all what that's going to be. And it's like both of these, it's all preparation for them, and they don't realize it. They're still thinking, I'm here to do a job. No, God's here to shape you and form you and mold you into what he wants you to be. And so that's what this whole, I think that whole walk was. They just don't get it. Like you said, Dad, we don't get it in the middle of it. We we think we're, God's gift to humanity. It's like, no, humanity is God's gift to us to teach us what it's like. I'll leave it there. There's more, but
There
Bob,
you go.
what about you?
No, you nailed that. And John in the love deal, because remember when Jesus is prepping him and he's saying, you're the guy that's got to stay. And he's playing with, as a pro soccer ref, okay? And having been at those deals, you see him on TV all the time. The ref will point for a penalty kick, right? So he gets his point, and then all the other defenders go and race to him and they're complaining. And you're like, okay. So how many times have you ever seen a referee go, you know what? Good idea, guys. I'm going to and think another way. It's like, you're not changing his mind. It's not, he made the call, it's not going to happen. We deal a little differently today with TV replay and all this stuff, but let's just say that from that decision standpoint, trust me, it's supported far more than it is overridden, if not the other way around. Something they didn't call ends up being one. So, but that reality point is he's made his call, right? And you're not going to change his mind. So John is coming through every trick in the book trying to get that point. But Jimmy, you hit it on the head. It was a love point. He said, you've been with him since childhood.
Yeah.
He's going to need you. John doesn't understand why. Yeah. So Dad, I think you're on that given point is that I don't know if we do realize why we're in a certain moment. Because I think the majority of those times learning are hindsight. This is why I was there. Is that fair? So maybe sometimes to cut ourselves and those involved in our life story with that, cut them a little slack, right? Because obviously something that I'm doing has the possibility of being a learning, but it's going to take me somewhere else. Yeah.
Right.
And so in that deal, I don't think you can understand the moment when you're in it. And we look back on them all the time like, you should have seen this. It's like, on what planet did you think that? Because you don't even think it yourself. Kind of bold to be so overly righteous, ambitious, pick your choice on the word, rather than going humble and go, oh my gosh, I just put John's sandals on, or I just put Simon's sandals on, and they fit scarily well. How about that? Is that a scary statement? They fit too well. And I go, and it scares you that they fit. Because they're both hurt for different reasons.
Yeah.
Right? And when they finally realize this realization, they're still scrambling with it. And then what do we get? All of a sudden they walk up on the group, right? And we saw the build up to this. They're all around there. So Simon takes a look, peeking at it, and realizes it's going down. Yeah. And we see something happening. So, Dad, anything last short thing you want to add?
Well, the group that's waiting for him. You've got all these people waiting. You've got the one guy that's waiting for him, and then the deaf man. I mean, Jesus just takes everything in stride. Here's this little thing over here. And they're telling him, hey, we got big picture stuff here, buddy. And he heals. And he addresses each group individually. And you're going to see that as in the next episode. But he is so into the person, the people, that he doesn't have this overarching. He cares about each group there and addresses them. and now he's going to talk with them. And I just I think the way it wrapped up was excellent. Again, they're saying a lot of words are being said. You had three guys there throwing stuff at him, words,
Mm-hmm.
groups, one individual, and then
Mhm.
two groups. So uh, next episode, uh, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy, any closer for you?
That final scene where all these groups are coming at him, you had this cacophony of chaos happening.
Yeah.
And Dad, like you said, Jesus kind of just approaches it with this care and compassion, that everybody's got issues going on. And even at one point, Jesus said, you don't understand how I deal with pain. You know, my approach to pain is different than your approach. And Jesus was doing that. You realized, and this drives me back to the time we got in that accident years and years ago, Dad,
Mhm.
in the Kingswood station wagon.
Yeah.
And I remember you were angry at the guy, but it was fear, is what it was, and it came out later. You were scared for your family, that we were injured or whatever,
Yeah.
and that's what people tend to do. We get angry when we're afraid
Yeah.
and we don't know what's going to happen. And that's what Jesus saw. He saw the fear. He didn't see the anger.
Yeah.
And so he's ready to address that.
Yeah. Excellent. That, and there's guys, okay, relax. We're going to be here for a while. Pump the brakes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk. Yeah. And realizing that everybody has something that needs to be addressed. Validity is a debatable point, but that the fact that everything is going to be addressed and how he feels he needs to address it is the fun part. And I kind of want to remember this too. The last scene as they're getting ready and Simon sees it and he looks at it and then he takes off. I thought Simon said he didn't run. Simon said, I don't run. And we see him run. So I thought that was his own statement, and he's realized, yeah, I thought that was cute. So I thought it was kind of funny. So again, thank you all for being here. And to y'all, again, shalom, shalom. And thanks for with us tonight on another edition of Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet.